Hello, everyone. So thank you all for joining today. My name is Caitlin Crook, and I'm the Assistant Director of Affinity Programs. And on behalf of the Office of Alumni Relations, thank you for joining us today. And please introduce yourselves in the chat box below as I share how this session will work. So we're really excited to have Kennon Stewart here as our guest speaker today. And, just before we kick off the conversation, I want to review a few housekeeping items. So the first one is please use the chat feature to ask your questions. And also note that we will have plenty of time after for discussion and Q&A. Secondly, if you're having any technical difficulties, please direct message Sarah McAllister and she will assist you. And thirdly, we just want you to know that this session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel this afternoon. And Sarah will also share the link to access this session and all previous PBS sessions in the chat. So with that being said, I think we can get started. If that's all right with you, Kennon.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so first, I just want to say thanks, Kennon, for really taking the time to be here with us today. And, the goal of the conversation is just to learn about your professional journey and provide some takeaways for anyone that's interested in pursuing roles, in tech and, what it looks like to be young and in tech and pivoting and all that. So just to get us started, can you give us a little bit of background and anything else that would be helpful as we start this conversation?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. It's good to meet you. I'm Kennon. I'm currently living in Seattle. And yeah, I graduated in December 2020 when the pandemic was still going. And since then, I have worked at HP. I've done some work at SAP for a very, very short time. And I'm now working at Amazon as a data engineer. And when I was at Tulane, I majored in math and sociology.
Yeah. So tell us about that math and sociology. How, what led you to the tech field with that background?
It sounds like a weird major combination. It's because it is. My mom thought it was way weirder. And honestly, I did it because I liked reading. Sociology is a bunch of reading. It's a bunch of studying people. And math was me hedging my bets in case I wasn't able to find a degree or find a job. And so I was taking some math classes, and I think I was halfway done with the major. And I figured to just do the major, primarily because math is one of the few things you can do with headphones inside the library and no one talks to you and no one will bother you.
Okay. And so now you're a data engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that specifically? What do you do in your role?
A data engineer is I didn't know what it was before I interviewed for the job. A data engineer is someone who moves data from one place to another securely and preferably quickly. And so data is housed all over the world in different storage units, different silos, getting it to where it needs to go without compromising the data and while respecting the data and the stories it tells. That's what a data engineer does.
And if I wanted to be a data engineer tomorrow, what skills do you think I need? Like what's the background in such?
Oh my gosh, these people come from everywhere. On my last team, one of the best engineers I worked with was previously majored in astrophysics. He didn't know that much about code, but he knew a lot about numbers and organizing numbers. Primarily, it's just communication. Learn to express yourself, your thoughts. It's also working with others. So people think that a lot of engineering is the technical backend, but it's actually communicating the value of what you're doing so that your project gets funded. And learning how to also interact with other engineering teams is super crucial, because now that a lot of systems that are being built are dependent on these other products, they're dependent on other engineers. If you can't talk to the teams who built those other products that you rely on, then you can't build anything. And so first, just enjoy talking to others, enjoy engaging with others. And then after that, right, preferably SQL skills, some sort of programming skills, Python, Java, but you don't have to like write full microservices. Primarily interactions with others. Yeah.
Okay. And do you feel that you learned a lot of this at your time at Tulane, or do you feel like this was mostly kind of like on the job training, learn as you go type of situation?
It was mostly on the job training. Like at Tulane, and I say on the job training because when I was working at Tulane, I was doing research and working with the data of research. That was integral to what I'm doing now, because if you can spend time, you see you in some Excel spreadsheets, trying to gain the truth of what these numbers are trying to tell you. When it comes time to move that data, you're in a better position to honor it. You're in a better position to maintain its integrity. And so when I was working at Tulane, a lot of the skills that I learned from Dr. Mimi Samarco's lab, and I don't know if she's still there, but she's fantastic. Um, that was probably the best experience that I've had, because not only did I learn how to work with data, but I learned how to synthesize data, how to analyze it. Even when I had zero idea about what I was analyzing. I was working with like digit regeneration data, and I don't know anything about biology or chemistry. But if you can do that, and learning that on the job, that was only something I could do in that environment. I don't think it's something I could have learned in class.
Mhm. Oh yeah. That's I love the answer. And kind of thinking more so about things that you learn outside or things that you need outside of the classroom, like connections and networking. How do you feel that that has impacted your career path and just like navigating the tech industry in general?
It's been everything. Like I mentioned Dr. Mimi Samarco, like this PI, principal investigator, who like took a shot on me and was like, this kid knows nothing about biology. Let me hire him to do my statistics. That is those sort of like human connections are like what makes like a whole like job search. And so her taking a chance on me, um, when I allowed me to get my first job at HP, um, when I was at HP, I was working with Dr. Mithra Vankapuram, who is a researcher or was a researcher in HP Labs. He's an experienced researcher. And like, as far as like working with people, as far as like learning how to be a good engineer, they were essential to my training, right? Like we would set up weekly meetings where for like 2 hours in the morning, I would be in New Orleans, like, like soaking in up all this knowledge about how to be a good data worker, how to be a good coworker, um, what it means to work in the tech industry, and the quirks of working with tech workers. Um, and they just passed on all this incredible knowledge that they got from their PhD, from working at HP, and I wouldn't be half the person I am without their guidance. And so like mentorship is huge. I think more so mentorship than networking. Networking is weird because people restrict their networks. Um, but seeking knowledge from other people, even if they don't want to include you in their network, people are more than happy to give some things that they've learned. Um, and so Dr. Stamarco, Dr. Vankapuram, um, and even the coworkers that I'm working with at my current company, just working with these people and hearing the plans, the things they like to do, the plans they have for the future, it's like the way their minds work. Um, Not only am I confident, like I want to work with these people in the future, even if I leave the team, I can go back to them um, and just ask their advice. But um, also, yeah, they're just working with them it was an experience in mentorship itself, which was a blessing.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Like you're really leveraging, your connections. And what I do want to talk about next is you kind of mentioned how you're working at HP, you worked at SAP for a little bit, and now you're working at Amazon. And to say you graduated in December 2020, three companies in, you know, why exactly, are you making those pivots? Do you think that adds value? Like, just kind of getting your reasoning behind these moves. Because I know that Kennon has, you don't do anything without a reason. So I'd love to hear your strategy.
Oh my gosh. I think I was in like school, and I was originally pre-med. I think Katie, you might even remember my pre-med days.
I
Um,
do.
and I realized I was like, oh gosh, I was like, I don't think I have just like the strength for med school. Um, I'm like, what do I want to do with my life? And I realized I really just want to travel, eat good food, and meet good people. And to do that, you have to make money. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to do after school, this was like the middle of COVID. Um, I needed something that allowed me to work at a decent pace, right? You don't want anything too fast paced. Um, and also allowed me to learn on the job. Like that's key. I wanted to develop and learn on the job skills that honestly I thought would pay well in the future. And so when I was looking for my first job, they were looking for someone who was comfortable with numbers. And the math piece wasn't even that heavy, being working in analytics at HP, but just learning to get comfortable with data and using that as an internship opportunity. That was crucial because that allows other companies to feel like they can take a risk on you. Um, but I needed just jobs that would teach me skills that I'd be able to market later in my career. Um, and so yeah, started HP because I just wanted to. I was working with data before when I was working with Dr. Samarco, but this was like people data that was centered on telling the stories of online shopping, which I used to do a lot in those days. Um, and so from there, I said, okay, analyzing data is fantastic. I had some experience doing that. I had like a good project that I was working on that I saw to completion. And I was looking for another position that was more technically focused because I figured, okay, in terms of working with data, analyzing data is one thing, but folks also need people who can move that data, who know how to program. That's a skill that I wanted to develop. And so that's when I moved to SAP, which was a lot of operational data. It was a lot of not only data in the purest sense, meaning that I didn't know what was happening. Much of the data was in German. Our tables were in German. Um, much of the data that was flowing that I had to handle is just numbers and letters. And that was crucial for me because if you can work with objects that you don't completely understand and you can still take a project and then lead it to completion, imagine what happens when you can actually understand the data that you're moving. And so I had that experience for like a few months working with operational data stores at SAP. And then what led me to Amazon was primarily I was working with operational data sets at SAP, but like Amazon's data stores are like the amount of data that they work with is massive. And so I was working first with just a shipping business, not even the entire business. I was working with a shipping business that was primarily based in Europe and the Asian Pacific. Um, and just the amount of stuff that I was forced to learn, um, it was great because I know that especially going into other positions, like those are marketable skills. And so yeah, I just wanted to get into jobs where I could learn and then have coworkers who were willing to teach. Um, yeah, and then it just so happens that the companies that and all of this, right, while also trying to make enough to live a decent life, do the things I want to do. And so that's what each of the job moves meant for me. Um, I also think it's worth noting that I have not stayed at a lot of my positions for a very long time. Um, yeah, I would say that was not as much of a concern for me, if only because data in its purest sense, whether you're working with data from marketing analytics or you're working with operational data stores, if you know how to handle data, if you, I don't know, build good project management skills in previous scenarios, that's something you can take with you anywhere. And with tech, they really don't care as long as you can pass the interview. And so, yeah. And so using the time that you have, even if you're only there for a few months, I think is also super helpful.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like not being stuck on one position or company and just being open minded and doing what, kind of works best for you. So,
Jobs are, I don't want to say, I think it's insensitive to say jobs are a dime a dozen, but they really are, right. And even if it's not data engineering, any their position, like if I wasn't doing this, I'd just be working. Like whatever I was doing, I would be working. And so remaining stuck on one job, remaining stuck on a company, um, when there's so many other people to learn from, so many other jobs to learn from, it doesn't make sense. And especially during COVID, right, when you don't have to go into the office and the job is very much the tasks that you're doing every day. Um, you learn to optimize on what you're learning and what you're getting out of your position so that you can do the things you enjoy doing outside of work.
oh yeah, that makes tons of sense for me. Do you see yourself kind of like staying in this industry long term? And like, if so, like, what are some other positions that you're kind of interested in exploring? What's exciting you these days?
Am I interested in staying? Yeah, at least for now. I think there's a difference between like pure just working at like a pure tech company, but most companies will also need IT people. So worst comes to worst, I can work in an IT department. Um, but at least until I make enough money to retire and then I'm cutting out. Um, yeah, I'm just looking for stability. And then in terms of the next steps, right, what I'm interested in, I got this really like I just got this itch for project management, which is not so much coding, evaluating code, shipping products, as it is coordinating the teams who do all of that. And so I'm working with a product manager right now um, who just coordinates all of the documentation, the products that we have, and makes it so that the product, like we're making deadlines and everything. He's incredible. He does all this working remotely from Ohio. And I like just the amount of engagement, the amount of interaction, and the amount of, I think, people that you're exposed to. It seems like a really incredible field. I'd love to get some exposure to it.
Oh yeah, yeah. It interests me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. So I could see how that's exciting.
Katie, I think you'd be a fantastic PM. Like I would happily like want to work with you. Like just knowing how your mind works, especially like in your documentation skills, you'd be better than most of the PMs I've worked with. I can tell you that.
Thank you for that. We'll have to chat offline for sure.
Absolutely.
But I guess I kind of just want to pivot back to you were saying that you wanted to travel, you wanted to eat well, and you wanted to, be with your people. So, kind of like in that same thing, how are you balancing your work life situation? Are you putting, is your work above your personal life? Like, what is the juggling act here?
Yeah, no. Work life is tantamount, or life is tantamount, right? And work funds what you do with your life. And it was interesting working here because there are definitely people who do not follow that, right? There are people who are very interested in like just brute force throwing themselves at a problem no matter how long it takes. That has never been me, right? And that's not working intelligently. Um, when it comes to work-life balance, your life fuels even like your life fuels and allows you to do well at work because the experiences that you have in your day to day, you wouldn't think that they allow you to be a better project manager, that they allow you to build a better piece of code. They very much do. Some of the best infrastructures I've gotten, or some of my favorite infrastructures that have ended up somehow working the best have come from inspirations from reading books, from taking time off and taking a step back from a problem. Um, but primarily, I know that if I throw myself at work consistently, I'll burn myself out, and that won't even allow me to build longevity. Um, and so it's really about respecting yourself, um, and then also making demands of your workplace. It sounds weird. That's not something that I think I was raised to do, is make demands of the people that you work with. Um, but it's more so just making demands of your manager and setting expectations about what you will and won't do. And so when I first joined the company, my first manager sat me down, like it was my first conversation with this guy. And he was like, yeah, he's like, I wake up and I start work at every day at 7, he's like, I try to end around, like 5 or 6, but sometimes it goes over. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking and he's like, so what are your work hours? You need to set your work hours. And I'm like, okay, I'll work 9 to 5. And that's like what I can give you, right? Being honest, but also just being firm that you're a human being, you have things you're doing with your outside life, and people will respect that. And then eventually, right, there are teams that um, value work-life balance, like while still getting their work done. And that's a team that I'm on now, where if you need to, like, if you're like tire blows, like we all just have those days where life doesn't go as it's planned and needs to take a day off. We're a team that respects that, and that's something I love. Um, and they really just, as long as you do your work, like you do, you do what you have to. Um, but work, it's very much to fuel. is very much a tool that you use to fuel your life. And then by living a good life, by having good experiences, um, you'll be a much better worker, you'll be a better person to work with. Um, you'll have a personality that is not your job, which is super important.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I love that answer. I love how it's like your passion for life is kind of fueling what you're doing in the workplace. So I can definitely appreciate that. Um, and I guess my next question would be, we talked a lot about, this has been like a really interesting interview. But my next question would be, what surprises you most about your work? What is something that you had not seen before?
I think people, and this is like the dopest piece of the industry, is like people will come to this company from like wherever. And so one of the best people that I've worked with, my favorite coworkers, has been a data scientist from Istanbul who moved to Seattle, and she spent like outside, like she's just very passionate about urban freight, how we move things through cities, and in general cities themselves. She's really passionate about how they form. And coming from Istanbul, she was talking to me about just how the unique and historic nature of that city informs a lot of what she studied, informs what she reads to this day, what she does outside of work. Um, and that directly allows her to build, or to be, yeah, to build better products, because um, she loves cities, she studies them in her free time, it's what she's passionate about. And so when it comes to building a transportation system, which is what she was doing, she was building a transportation system that moves efficiently through cities without disrupting traffic, or respecting the regulations and the flow and the life that lives in these cities. She was able to do that, and it was almost like a joy for her. Um, what surprised me the most about this industry is how severely your passions play into what you do, right? If you come at this, and especially if you're building products and you're coming at it with the idea that your background, who you are, doesn't play into the products that you're building, you're fooling yourself when you're building a bad product. Um, Allowing yourself to bring in your interests gives the product, I think, a lot of the efficiencies that make it perform well. Um, but that comes from having people who study different things. It comes from having especially racial and gender diversity, right? Especially working with data, you can't get good insights from data if a bunch of men is the only people who are analyzing it. You can't get good insights if white people are the only ones analyzing it. And so having diversity all throughout the industry, which is something they're not good at doing it, but they're at least trying. I see the effort, is the thing that I think makes this industry great. So yeah, it's the people who I've met, the places they come from. Um, that's what continues to surprise me. Not even the technology, which itself is cool. We're working with robots, we're working with machine learning algorithms. Um, and that's not even, I think, what excites me the most. It's how people bring themselves and are able to transform that, build code around it, and you build a product that works seamlessly with humans. Like that's the coolest thing I've seen happen here.
I love it. You went like real like nerd on me, but like I do love and appreciate the answer. I guess my next question, since we're talking about reading, and I know that you yourself love reading and have your own Instagram page full of like good reads. What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? It's literally in my backpack upstairs. The Book of Lamentations. It is about the state of Chiapas in southern Mexico, which is where the Zapatista movement really started taking off. And it's about the people who work essentially what's this plantation and how they make their life during this period of radical transformation in Mexican society, which is when their president started redistributing the land and the plantations were broken up. And so a woman who was raised on this farm, this industrial plantation, she wrote a book, and she's writing about the lives of these people. Um, and again, like just the level of human storytelling, it doesn't seem like it's related to data, but when you're working with data that is the compressed version of millions and millions of human stories, reading books, reading about human stories, reading narratives like the Book of Lamentations, is key. And also it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous book. The prose is written really, really well. I would highly recommend it.
Okay. I got something next for my list. I took note of that, so it's definitely gonna be on my list. But I love that. I think now, let's see, we're almost time for our Q&A. But I just have like one last question. Um, I guess, what advice do you have for recent grads or people that are looking to break into tech, whether that be the interview process, what kind of makes you successful in that lane, just working in tech in general, what's your like stamp of advice?
I think it's incredible the amount of well-prepared people I come across, just like in my day-to-day, who haven't had success with interviews or finding jobs. And I think one of it is partially because the job that I'm doing, right, the job that a lot of people are doing at these companies, especially with the rise of ChatGPT, we're finding that anyone can do these jobs. And so when they're picking the roles, right, it's not so much a reflection of your talent, so much as what data points they can ascertain from a resume and your application. And so it's not even a reflection of you or your intelligence or anything like that. It's literally just a game of numbers in that way and optimizing your chance of getting a resume picked up. But even in terms of like preparation, I'm not a big fan of paying for code camps. I think I'm not going to say it's a waste of money, but LinkedIn Learning has been my I've used LinkedIn Learning, and it's probably been the best tool that I've used, and that's free with a Tulane email address. I've been using my Tulane address for LinkedIn Learning, and I think that's been like a huge help. Primarily emphasizing the impact you already have is like the best way, because particularly with people who are very well prepared, they know data algorithms and data structures, they know how to code. Because they don't know how to express the impact they've had on previous projects, or what they've done, then it comes off as underselling yourself when it comes into interviews. And this is primarily when, I think, because a lot of people, particularly men, when we're in interviews, oversell themselves. You're saying, yeah, this is the impact that I had, and they will brag the entire interview. I've seen interviews where people just talk about themselves. And having a bit of that, just like that bodaciousness and willingness to brag on yourself and say, this is the impact that I had, and I drove this experience for this many people, or it literally was groundbreaking in this way, and just taking that time. It's not even a question of your skills, because primarily the people I've seen, coming out of these boot camps, the people I've seen coming out of coming into these interviews, they're incredibly people. They're incredibly smart, right? They can code really well. I have no chance they succeed. I have no doubt that they would succeed. Um, but when you ask about projects, or they're not very focused on the impact of what they've had. And so just spending time bragging on yourself, if you can stand in front of a mirror and say, like, just talk about how great you are, the impact you've had professionally, the things that you have learned and how difficult that has been. I also think talking about how you've not even just like how you've surmounted your obstacles, but also talking about the difficulties you faced, how you failed, and how you've learned from that, um, is something that sets people apart. Because a lot of interviewers, or a lot of interviewees, even myself, when I'm going into an interview, um, I'll be talking about myself, and I'll be like, yep, this is how great I did on these different projects. Um, and that's not what people want to hear, right? They want to hear about how you struggled for like 3 days straight on a piece of code that you didn't know what it meant. Google couldn't tell you what it meant. And when Google doesn't know, it does not exist. How you struggled on that, how you surmounted that, who helped you, how did you ask for help? Did you ask for help at all, right? That's a good data point. Being honest about that process. Um, yeah, focusing on code skills is great, but working with projects, how you've ran into obstacles, how you struggled, and how you overcame them is way more telling about you as a person, and is helps me answer whether or not I'd want to work with you as a coworker.
I think, I think that's great. I think what it sounds to me is you kind of just have to have that overall level of confidence, and also kind of that what we've been talking about this whole conversation is like your storytelling and your narrative. You really have to have that kind of like pinned down. So I really love that answer. And now we're gonna move to Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please drop them in the chat and I'll read them out so Kenny can can share his ideas. So I guess while we wait for questions, we could still chat it up. um,
What have you been listening to lately? What's on your Spotify rotation?
a lot of Beyonce, Renaissance.
Oh my gosh. I have so many thoughts, especially given that she hasn't won album of the year. That that was something that I almost called off of work for. Like, I just needed to rest after that. Oh my God.
I hate it because it's like I love Beyonce, but I also love Harry Styles. Do I feel like he deserved album of the year? I don't know, but I do love him as an artist as well.
I don't even have that like moral quandary because I don't even like Harry Styles, and so this was not even a question for me. I sympathize with your issue though. Good for you.
Okay, let's see. We have a question in the chat. Can you kind of talk about remote work and what it looks like for your industry?
Yeah, a lot of what I do can be done from anywhere. Um, I just like doing it from the office because it gives me like a routine that I can do every day. Um, but it's you can do it from anywhere, and especially I think that it helps um, that I wasn't living when I was working at HP. My team was based in San Diego and Guadalajara, Mexico. Because I was in a different time zone, I was working from New Orleans. That was helpful because we had teams in London that we were working with, and so any morning meetings that my team couldn't take, it was me who was taking them. Um, but then also, yeah, since a lot of the work that we do, um, a lot of the meetings that we have are very much like this, except I don't turn on my camera. If you can do it, you just have to do that from wherever makes you comfortable. And so some of my team is in Seattle. Many of them went back to California because it's warm and sunny. And then a few are currently working. They're based in Seattle. They're visiting families in India. A lot of folks around Hyderabad. So wherever you can do your work um, and do it well, while also making meetings, yeah, they're super usually really open to that. And even like this used to, I think Amazon used to have like a very office centric culture. Since then, it's very much just come into the office when you need to collaborate with your team. And even then, I started working here, I was based in Chicago, and my manager did not want me to move out to Seattle because not only could I take teams with London or meetings with London and early in the morning that he didn't want to wake up, but also because I didn't like that's when a project gets large enough that you need to meet with your team. He just said that was something I could come in and we could set up like a trip around that. But they've been really good about working remotely and working from wherever allows you to do your best work, whether it's here, a library in Sedona, you just have to do it from there.
That makes sense to me. I feel like, you know, it kind of just goes back to that work-life balance that you were talking about earlier. And that as long as your work is impressive, you can do it from anywhere. And I think that's like the best things that came out of the pandemic, really, that we learned. So,
Yeah. And yeah, it's literally just what you said, right? As long as you can work from where you are, there's not usually a good, there's not a, honestly, there's not a good reason to come into the office. Again, the only reason I come in is because I have good outfits and I like showing them off. And again, I like having a good routine.
yeah, agreed. Let's see. Next question. Is there something in particular that you mean by the code working cohesively with humans, and what were the barriers?
Oh my goodness. And so particularly so in my current role, I work a lot of with data that comes from fulfillment centers. Um, and our data sources are either robots that sometimes control the entire fulfillment center, or there are people who work inside of them, right? The folks who are actually on the ground, moving and shaking, making this entire fulfillment network work. Um, and so not only with data from robots, right? It's always really well formatted. It's always very neat and tidy and pretty. It's easy to build pipelines around them. It's easy to work with that sort of data. The more fulfilling work and the work that is much more important is taking the data that is given to you by fulfillment center human workers, right? And then using that data that they painstakingly give you, right? They write notes to, they write us notes, they write us, um, how things are going well, when things are going wrong, right? Like the information we get from these people is so, so crucial. How to take that data and then allow it to make their work, to make their lives, to make their work easier. And so similar to how a machine might send us a notification, hey, this isn't working well, or maybe this, package is at a risk of being late. Humans send us that same information. How do we honor that data? How do we get the most information from it so that when someone from Cincinnati or someone from Shanghai is telling us, hey, this process I'm seeing, this process I'm doing isn't working, we can make their lives easier, make that process easier. And so that's what I mean by the code should work specifically when you're working with data. It should work really well with humans by taking the information they're giving you and really using that to make changes to the processes so that they don't have to work as hard. They have a lot of things on their plate, the people who work in the company. If there's anything I can do to make their lives a bit easier, I should absolutely take that route.
Makes sense to me. Let's see. We have another question from Luis. He said, if you were to hire someone, what would be a red flag in terms of job hopping, if any?
So this is something I asked my manager of my current team because I was like, I needed to know. I was like, I haven't spent a lot of time on these other teams. What reflects well and what doesn't reflect well. And he said what interested him was the fact that when you're on different teams, as long as you have something that you have learned from that team and you've worked on a project and can speak meaningfully about that experience, if you've stayed at the company long enough to do that, then you've stayed enough to make an impact. And so it's a red flag when, let's say, you're working on a team and people ask you what you do and you have no idea, like you're looking just as confused as they are. That looks bad. But I think going to an interview, if you sit down and they ask you what impact did you drive on this team, and you have that that track record that speaks for you, that works really well. I think also sometimes I just get bored, and I like working on different projects. One thing about Amazon is they're very supportive of that, of people getting bored and switching to different teams. And so the process for moving internally is almost is pretty scarily easy. And so what I was also able to do was when interviewing with my new team internally, because he was within the company, I could actually show him code snippets that I had written, right? This question of what impact you had driven was very easy to answer when I can show him the code that I wrote, can show him the calculations and the visualizations. And that made it much easier. Yeah. And so I do think I was thinking about that as well. I think after I switched roles this previous time, I was like, oh, I wonder if this is going to harm my chances. But after speaking with a few folks, particularly my manager, a few recruiters, it really is, and especially when it comes to engineering roles, it really is whether you can do the job, whether you can code, whether you know the algorithms, and then whether you've driven impact previously. However long you've taken to drive that impact is up to you.
I love that. I love that answer, and it's very honest. And I guess I think in that same vein, um, when you're job hopping and just thinking about the future, like 20, 30 years from now, whenever you plan on retiring, how does that affect, your strategy for retirement?
Oh my goodness. So I'm a big fan of spreadsheets. And so not only keeping really good track of your retirement, keeping your accounts consolidated, but then also making sure that I'm 23. I don't have a lot of commitments right now, making the maximum deductions or shares toward my retirement fund. This is the time to do it. And so in job hopping, that's not as much a concern, particularly because if you're leaving your job, you should be making if you're leaving your job, it should be to make a bit more than what you're making currently. And it should make it, yeah, it should make it so that your savings and your retirements are much, or to make it so that your savings and your retirements, the money that you put away is way, way more impactful. And so I think that's another consideration about job hopping is that um, it should really, because your resume is a really precious thing, hop when you have that actual financial measure where you're saying, yes, this would make a difference in my life. Um, And I think that's a good measure. If you're looking at the impact of your new job and you're saying this allows me not only to learn more, but also um, better my quality of life, go for the move. Especially if you've already seen your projects to completion, if you've learned from what you needed to learn from your current position.
And just curious, was your job hopping, were you actively searching or were you like someone reached out to you? Because I know that that happens a lot too, where it's like you're fine at your job, but an opportunity just presents itself. Like,
Yeah. So for my first job, no one was like, I was getting turned down from a job. No one was reaching out to me. That is not a thing, I think, for first jobs. People are, um, yeah, that didn't happen. And so it was primarily me just sending cold emails, applying through the internet. Um, and I think after that, when I was done with my time at HP, that was after about a year and some months. That's when I started looking because I had some experience at a company. Folks were a bit more lenient, or people were more forthcoming with giving interviews. Um, but then after I went to SAP, um, that's when recruiters started reaching out. And so I wasn't looking. I actually really liked SAP. They had really great work-life balance. They had a great professional development track. Um, it was only after a recruiter reached out from Amazon and taking that call that I was like, okay, well, this makes a bit more sense. But initially, no one is reaching out. No one was returning my emails. No one was reaching back out to my applications. Um, it was a very slim, like it's a game of numbers, and I was not winning at all. Um, that only came later.
I love it. I love how like, if I'm looking at your resume, I'm like, Kennon's doing the thing, which you are doing the thing. But I think I love that you point out that it's not all, roses and sunshine. It comes to that. So I love that piece. Um, well, it looks like we're at 12:50. So I wanted to ask you if, you know, what is, if I'm watching this, what's like the most important thing that should come out of this? Like, what is your last imparting message on us?
You are your best asset. Your experience is like the thing that will make you successful, right? People think that you join a big company and you know, gain all this impactful experience. The things that you're doing in your life, what interests you, what that is what brings value to the products you build, to the interviews, to the teams that you'll join. Um, and brag on that. Like that is something that you should use as your forefront. And the technical skills that you learn after are fantastic. They'll only build on that experience that you already have. Um, yeah, so just valuing your experience, you have the knowledge that you need to make you successful. The only thing code will do is allow you to do that, allow a computer to take some of that burden off of you for you to do that faster. Um, but having that experience working with people, having that experience communicating and advocating for yourself is much more is way more impressive to me currently at this point than any piece of code you could write.
I loved it. That's like you couldn't have ended that better. And I really do, I want to say thank you again for joining me. This is perfect. We need to do this more often, preferably in person in New Orleans.
No, Katie, when I'm back in New Orleans, I love coming back to New Orleans so much, but you're always on the go, bro. Like it is so hard to catch you.
We're busy people, but we
Oh
will
my
make
God.
it. But to all the participants and attendees today, I also want to thank you guys for coming into this conversation with me and Kennon. It was lovely. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll have this on our YouTube channel, and Sarah McAllister is going to be sharing all the links and resources. And I guess, Kennon, if people want to reach out to you, how should they do that?
My LinkedIn is there. My yeah, hit me on LinkedIn. My email on, I still have a two-lane email. I think that's still active. You can hit me there. If anyone's on Instagram and you want to send me a DM, feel free to do so, but I don't check my messages frequently. But yeah, email, LinkedIn is usually best.
Okay. All right. Well, that's what we'll do. Well, this was lovely, and thank you all. So have a great rest of your afternoon.
Y'all take it easy.